Walt, that day has come. Elon's going back to Tesla. Investors are roaring. Waymo is now completing 250,000 fully autonomous rides a week. Wayve is expanding operations to Japan. Uber continues to fragment the market, this time with a partnership with VW to put the mini ID buses. And Secretary Duffy says, we're rolling back regulations. We're scaling autonomy. Busy week. Let's start with Waymo. 250,000 fully autonomous rides a week. Does that become the new metric of how we measure success of robotaxi deployments?
We'll gravitate to whatever metric that these companies are willing to give us, but that's certainly a good number, up from 200,000 just in February of 2025. So 12% in a very short period of time. So yeah, obviously that's great. We just need to get them to more cars, and then we can really see what the growth rate would be like.
More cars are coming, and when Waymo promoted this announcement on X, they used the term, I'm going to quote this here, Walt, powered by our generalizable Waymo Driver. That means, in theory, the Waymo Driver does not have to rely on HD maps anymore. Or is somebody listening to Autonomy Markets? What's going on?
That was a great catch that you found on that tweet. Generalizable Waymo Driver. I don't think we should tweet about this and see how many other people pick this up until after our podcast drops on Saturday. But yeah, I mean, if you just look at what that word means, it reflects this kind of debate that we've had on the podcast on many episodes in terms of the old map approach, and that perhaps handcuffing Google or enabling their competitors to kind of launch forward versus, what Tesla is doing and so many of these other startups like Wayve, who we'll talk about later in the podcast, are doing. So maybe that's an indication that Google is going to make that switch. The question is, can they? Because the only thing we've heard about out of Google in terms of a true end-to-end AI was that white paper at the end of 2024. And I can't imagine that they've made massive inroads in that, since that paper. So what are they really referring to here?
What they're referring to, I'll just say this point blank, we need more clarity on exactly what they're referring to. Can they? Yes, they have the financial resources to do pretty much anything. I want to find out how they incorporated some of the Google DeepMind technology into this, and perhaps that's starting to accelerate. We really, truly do need more clarity. Do you think that we will perhaps get that clarity from Waymo in the coming months?
I certainly hope so, Grayson. I think this call was more helpful than most in terms of information about Waymo, whether they're willing to really embrace this generalizable and just say, hey, we're flipping on this kind of map-based approach. It would be great to get more clarification. I'm not going to hold my breath with this company in terms of getting that information, but certainly that could be a pivot in how the perceived approach is from that company.
It would be really nice. I think it would help investors properly value Waymo. And on the call, Sundar Pichai gave us insight. Mr. Pichai said, I'm going to quote him here, Waymo continues progressing on two important capabilities for riders: airport access and freeway driving. It's coming. That's a direct quote from Mr. Pichai. Perhaps we see it in Q2.
I think he recognizes the obvious, which we've talked about literally since episode 1 here in terms of the unlock of airports for users of, any type of rideshare service. And we'll see what happens to Uber and Lyft's market share when Waymo does unlock that San Francisco airport and the LA airport similarly, or even just in LA in general, just based on my experience there, where rides were almost twice as long as they should have been because the cars were unwilling to go on these highways. So it's not surprising that they recognize that this is an issue. I think it's great that he at least acknowledges it on a call. And I think to your point, Grayson, you probably don't acknowledge a weakness on a call unless you're about to solve it. So maybe Q2 is going to be our quarter where we see some of these things opened up for Waymo to airports and on highways.
It seems to me on the call, Sundar is clearly getting dialed into the autonomy economy and what's happening in all things autonomy, because during the Q&A, this is the first time Mr. Pichai has ever been asked a question about Waymo during the Q&A. And this individual said, I'm going to quote this here because this is hot off the press. We just got off the call here, Walt. There are future optionality around personal ownership as well, so we are widely exploring, end quote. Mr. Pichai opened the door to licensing. He also opened the door to personal ownership of Waymo vehicles. Is he realizing the threat, as he said with Andrew Ross Sorkin at the Deal Book, that the threat that Tesla possesses to Waymo's core business?
I think that's an amazing quote. It's new information. I think you're right. Personal ownership can mean one of two things. They could theoretically create their own car and sell it. Doubtful that that's the issue. Or they could move towards a licensing deal with an OEM. And look, on recent podcasts, we've talked about that maybe OEMs are concerned about doing a deal with them because, you're basically inviting in the enemy. And you've talked about how there's been concern about Apple CarPlay and how OEMs don't want to invite them into the car. So maybe in those discussions, they realize in order to entice OEMs to partner with them, they have to offer a future to the OEMs, which include licensing their technology so that the OEMs themselves can go out and sell these cars to individual users, in terms of use. So that's a fascinating thing. I think it's the latter part for sure. And then the question is that in your mind good or bad for our rideshare companies, Uber and Lyft?
It's going to depend point blank on the price point of the vehicle. It's going to depend on the terms of the service. Can the vehicle only operate on the Waymo network? Can it operate on the Uber network? If it can operate on the Uber network, Uber gets further fragmentation. It's really going to come down to how is the service rolled out? What are the terms of services? And the big question that we do not know yet, do consumers really want to share their own personally owned autonomous vehicle? We do not know yet.
First of all, on that latter question, I think we don't have to know because I think in general, 2% of personal cars are people willing to share their cars anyway by doing rideshare. So everyone doesn't have to share their car in order to plug it into the network. Secondly, like if your car is fully autonomous, maybe you just say, pick me up at the airport and you don't have to use any rideshare network. I mean, that is the true future. But I guess, more specifically in terms of the licensing, and one of the things you said earlier in your answer, which was depends on whether you can use it on the Waymo network or other networks. And I think that's a key question, because if you go back to the Lyft relationship with Mobileye, they didn't talk about an OEM, but they referenced having a car that's quote unquote Lyft ready. That implied to me that this little company Lyft, $2 billion market cap, you can say like, okay, we'll do this partnership as long as whoever uses that autonomy only uses it on Lyft. That's fine. It makes sense. Now tell me how a government would feel if Google went to an OEM and said, we're going to enable you to sell these personally owned vehicles, but if it went into a robotaxi network, you're only going to be able to go into the Waymo network. I'm guessing that some governments around the world, including the United States, regardless of who is in office, is going to have an issue if they try and attempt that type of relationship. What are your thoughts on that?
Somebody's getting a very sternly written letter from the FTC. That's my thought. I don't really see it happening. I'm not saying somebody hasn't thought about it or tried it. So you have the Lyft ready, and at some point we are going to get Uber ready. We're going to get Waymo ready. What's going to happen, and we've seen this traditionally in automotive, that these companies are going to come together and they're going to develop a standard where the vehicle is built to a certain standard that can go on any network, and that's how it's going to end up going.
So if that is the case, right, and if we think that in part, especially with Google, the government will have influence, and there's this standard where you can't lock into one of the rideshare networks, that's a good new outcome or new scenario for Uber, right? Because if the past scenario was just a Waymo-only network, which just wipes out Uber, if now you have cars out there that are autonomous and right now the best autonomy, in the market today, then they can more easily be plugged into the Uber network and Uber can maintain its dominance. Again, as long as private ownership and how we utilize cars in general just doesn't dramatically change over the next 10 years.
If the economics of the vehicle change, where if you're leasing it and you have full autonomy and you can make money paying for it to go on a network, I think we'll see a higher increase of vehicles going on a network. I think another trend to look for, I think you're going to start to see more families adopt a single vehicle family versus a multi-vehicle family, depending on how the economics work.
I think there's a lot of things to think about in terms of how this changes. And look, a lot of the companies that are now out raising money for autonomy are going to have to deal with this new reality in terms of what bucket you're really putting Waymo, and really more specifically Waymo's technology, into.
Then there's the other aspect of Tesla. Will Tesla only allow Tesla robotaxis to operate on the Tesla network, or will they allow them, for pressure, going back to that standard, to operate on a Tesla network, that's going to be something we're going to have to watch as well.
Who knows if they face the same government scrutiny as a company like Google. Tesla doesn't have that kind of dominant, viewpoint or the dominant presence that someone like Google does in terms of how the agencies have looked at them. So I think in general that the bias for Tesla would be to say like, okay, it's going to build this massive robotaxi army, and even private owners would be locked into a Tesla robotaxi army that's out there. I think that's the way Elon has described it. It could be that Elon just says, I don't care. If you want to use my cars and we'll do a deal with Uber and plug it into them. I can certainly see that happening. We'll just have to wait to see what Uber kind of, indicates there. The bigger question with Uber, a company that has no cars on the road at the moment in terms of delivering service, they're on their earnings call. And for me, those comments on the call this close to June gave me a little bit more confidence, or a lot of bit more confidence, that I think Tesla is going to deliver on that June target for launching a robotaxi service in Austin, in June. And more importantly, I think based on his comments, without a safety driver. We've debated that on past podcasts, but I think when he's referencing, yes, we will have a remote driver, or someone basically saying, hey, if the car gets stuck, we're going to move it. That by definition implies that there's not going to be someone sitting in the car driving one of these Model Ys that's out there.
Correct. But you missed the key thing he said in the earnings call. Mr. Musk hedged for July. So it could get pushed to July. He hedged there. He also stated, as you clearly stated, the Model Ys, 10 to 20 vehicles. We believe that there's 35 Waymo vehicles currently operating. So if you look at Waymo has 35 operating in their ODD, Tesla's going to launch 10 to 20 Model Ys. How large of an ODD do you see these vehicles being deployed?
Again, that was a question that you and I debated on this podcast many times. So, and we were thinking like, oh, if it's driver out, is it going to be super limited, maybe only at a factory or whatever it is? But if it's but the way it was being described in 10 to 20 vehicles, I think what you're going to see is a similar service area that Waymo launched with. Yes, Waymo had 35 cars, so that's, significantly more in percentage terms, I guess. But is there really a difference between 20 and 35? The wait times for those Waymo cars was long because it launched during South by Southwest, and you had a bunch of nerds that were trying to hit the app often, so it was hard to get. I think since South by Southwest, perhaps they've added more cars to that network, but I think wait times have been a little bit better. So I'm guessing, if you're trying to read the tea leaves, that you're going to see a decent coverage area of Austin that approximates, I think, what Waymo and Uber are jointly delivering to that market today.
I agree with that, but I want to throw in a caveat here. Tesla's a band. People travel all over the country to go to Tesla events to be part of Tesla history. Will Tesla be able to keep up with the demand of all the Tesla fans flocking into Austin for this launch?
I hear you with that. They have a very loyal customer base. I don't think it's going to be the same as flying into Austin where people are coming in for South by Southwest. I don't think you're going to see the same number of people in Austin the day that Tesla launches. Certainly you and I are planning on heading down there as soon as there's any indication that it's available. But I don't think you're going to see the same type of numbers that you saw at South by Southwest.
We'll be down there, and don't forget, we're going to hit Terry Black's, and we're going to take an autonomous Tesla there, and then maybe because we're Autonomy Markets and we're non-autonomy partisan, we'll take a Waymo back. That's how we'll roll. Over time, how large do you see the Tesla fleet becoming in Austin?
I don't really know. I think if you try to do some basic math like we did before in terms of the number of Waymo cars that you really need to serve California, you could say, there's a couple hundred probably are necessary, for at least initial launch. And I think we did a little research and looked at that. There was probably about 8,000, 9,000 Teslas registered in the greater Austin area. And if you kind of match that to, what percent of privately owned cars are actually used for rideshare, we use some California data, and I think you get to about 2% of registered cars are probably used for rideshare on a regular basis. So if you took the 2% of the 8,400 Teslas, there might not be the same correlation, right? A Tesla owner might be less willing to be an Uber driver and have their car shared than a regular driver. But if you just use the 2%, that gets you to an incremental 150 vehicles, in addition to whatever Elon's putting in the market is in terms of the owned vehicles, like the 10 to 20 that they start with. So you could get up to the couple hundred that you would need between, the shared people willing to plug in their cars on the network, as well as a lower capital investment that Tesla would need to do in order to launch in a new market. And look, and most importantly, no mapping, right? I mean, I know we talked earlier in the podcast about Waymo, and maybe they're switching their approach here to increase their ability to get to markets faster. But the difference between Tesla launching a market right now and Waymo launching its 7th, 8th, or 9th market is without doing the mapping. That implies that maybe these things start cranking open at a much faster pace, and their ability to surpass Waymo in a very short time frame becomes a viable possibility.
I wouldn't necessarily say switching for Waymo. I would say modifying their approach because they realize that there's competition on the horizon. So here's a hypothetical. Let's say the Tesla Robotaxi launch goes off without a hitch. We're 6 months in, and we're starting to get data now, real quantifiable data, that the Tesla wait times are a lot lower than the Waymos, and Tesla's seeing significant uptick versus Waymo. Does that force Alphabet's hand to put more vehicles in the market and say, okay, we're competing in this market?
Grayson, this is like someone looking at the shipping times for an iPhone. The haters are going to be like, oh, the wait times are low because no one feels safe about getting an Elon's Tesla. And if they're long, it's like, oh, they just don't have enough cars in the market to address it, or maybe the cars are not performing well. So, and in terms of the actual data, Yipit or otherwise, aren't you the one that has criticized Yipit data as something that we shouldn't even be able to rely on?
Yes, but I do believe that we will get factual data from Tesla, not Yipit data, to help us make this comparison.
Again, Elon haters are gonna challenge anything that comes out of Tesla in terms of when you say reliable data.
Okay, so let's have the Elon haters, that there's some listen here, call me all sorts of weird names. Let's have them challenge this data. On the earnings call, Elon said that to make a Tesla probably costs 25 or 20% of Waymo with all the sensors included. If that's true, Waymo is going to have to get their cost down, and can Hyundai truly unlock that cost saving?
Look, it's undeniable that the Model Y is the most popular car in the world. But I've said this many, many times, like the cost of the Waymo today is frankly irrelevant because they haven't hit to their production level cars. And, it's really where the future car is going to be priced at. I still think that Tesla is going to be able to be cheaper, right, than what Waymo can put together, for sure, if all of this works as promised, right? And not just because of the not having a couple $100 front LiDAR in there. I don't think that's going to be the end all be all, but just how they're engineering from the ground up that product. It's going to enable them to leapfrog in terms of cost and frankly, just volumes.
As promised is the key, but we have government data. Tesla has expanded testing to the European continent. They are now legally able to test FSD Supervised with Tesla-trained drivers, and they are going to share data with the government of Norway. This is a very big step because now Tesla's on the European continent. What do you make of this move?
Just make it as you have governments now willing for it to be tested, where it wasn't long ago that people were insisting to us that there's no way that autonomy can work without LiDAR and the approach that Elon is taking. And here we are a month or two away from them starting that service in Austin, and governments in Europe, which I think generally have been pretty anti-Elon, maybe not in this particular country that's enabling it, Norway, to allow them to come in and do some testing. I mean, that's pretty positive.
It's very positive, and we're starting to see autonomy scale globally, with one of the fastest growing markets in autonomy being Japan. Our friends Alex Kendall and the team over at Wayve, they opened an office this week, and then lo and behold, he pops up with the founder of Tier 4, who was on the Road to Autonomy podcast this week. And in the press release that Wayve put out announcing their expansion to Japan, they put some very, very clever language. And I'm going to quote this from the Wayve press release here. And quote, "The new Yokohama Center will support testing and development in Tokyo and surrounding regions, deepen collaboration with Japanese OEMs, and accelerate product readiness," end quote. Did you pick up on that? It was OEMs plural, not single. We know they have the Nissan deal. We covered it last week. There potentially looks like, based on that language, that there's a second or third OEM deal coming.
This could be part of just trying to partner with the countries, right? So Nissan's a Japanese automaker, is it not? So the fact that they're actually going to be doing this trial in Japan, and perhaps they need some government approvals to operate in Japan, I think it makes sense. And whether it's with Nissan or multiple other ones, for them to do this. So good for them. And I think it relates to the OEM. The second thing I think about this that's interesting is we've heard many people talk about how different cultures, drive and walk in their streets and things like that, and how this is a challenge. And, May Mobility has talked about this at Olson in terms of what they have to deal with in Japan versus in the US. So I think it's almost a flex too. Wayve, also a company that's not reliant on mapping, right? AI first, AI native, end to end, no mapping, to say, hey, we can go to Japan. It's different than Stuttgart. It's different than the United States. And it doesn't matter. We're doing three very different things. And let's see how our technology performs in all these different scenarios. So I think it's a flex in some ways, but it's also, I think, it just has to do with the OEM partners that they happen to sign up this time around. And props to them. Like if it's more than one Nissan, you're signing up multiple OEMs at a time or in that process, then that's obviously great news for Wayve.
I'll give you a prediction here. One of the partners will be Honda. And I say that because Honda was an investor and a partner in Cruise. Honda was the one bringing Cruise to Japan. And furthermore, I do know for a fact that Honda was very upset and disappointed when Cruise was shut down, and Honda still has those autonomy ambitions. So that's my prediction, that Honda will be a partner with Wayve in the future. It's
great to see Wayve making these partnerships. Where's Neuro, Grayson? I mean, shouldn't we be seeing an OEM partnership with Neuro pretty soon here?
We have to. I would give Neuro 3 to 6 months to see an OEM partnership before investors begin to question, because they just had the capital raise at a $6 billion valuation. But we do need to see some announcement with an OEM partner, because when they get the OEM partner, that unlocks the Uber partnership. Similar to Wayve, that gets very, very interesting and gives Neuro path to scale.
Look, this is also stating the obvious, but Wayve, with successful partnerships with more OEMs, for whatever the reason, is another positive for Uber in terms of creating fragmentation. If Wayve can leapfrog Waymo or even keep pace with Tesla or leapfrog Tesla for all we know in terms of the functionality of the technology, that's going to be a positive for being able to plug into the Uber network.
It's a huge positive. Wayve's moving fast. Uber's also moving fast doing deals. Today we got an announcement that the VW ID bus, the old hippie fans, now they're getting autonomous and they're going on the Uber network starting in Los Angeles in 2026. But me being the guy that reads all the fine print, Walt, catch. Safety drivers. They do not think that they can get, and this was in a TechCrunch report, that they can get driverless until 2027. It seems a little premature to make that announcement.
Is this Mobileye wanting to make an announcement to their investors? It's obviously additive for Uber to help technology companies along the way. It's hard to know where Mobileye is. Again, I talked about Lyft earlier and their relationship with Mobileye and having a Lyft ready car on the Mobileye platform, but didn't even talk about a car. Like, what is the car? Is it this VW? Is it something else? I don't even know.
This was a Uber VW press release. Mobileye was only mentioned in the bottom in the disclosure part of who's going to power the technology. They were not part of the overall press release, so that's a sign there.
So I take back then what I said in terms of Mobileye using this to help with the technology. This is just, I guess, Uber and VW. I don't know, man. Until I see Mobileye delivering on some actual autonomous products as opposed to, ADAS type things, it's hard to truly understand where they are in the market.
Nobody understands. I don't know one individual that's been in the vehicle, and if you listen to Mobileye earnings call, they keep teasing that we're going to get this big win, but they're never giving Wall Street the certainty. And if we look back at what happened, don't forget, this is not the first rodeo for VW looking to deploy these autonomous vehicles. They were looking in July 2023, they announced that they were going to launch a fully autonomous program in Austin with a fleet of 10 ID buses. That was 2023. It never happened. The program was shut down. Now they're pivoting to LA. Something doesn't add up here. I think at some point VW is going to look for a new autonomy partner.
Well, what was the technology partner for the what you were referring to in Austin?
It was Mobileye. And there was a caveat in the contract that VW would not be allowed to operate that without a safety driver. And that's similar language that we saw with the Uber announcement for LA. Must be a safety driver until at least end of 2026 so they can explore going driver out in 2027. There's a pattern here.
Let's just put a pin in it. We look forward for our Mobileye listeners to reach out to us and help us understand kind of where you are on that, or even our VW listeners. Where are you on the roadmap? What technology you're going to use? And if you're Mobileye, what is your timeline in terms of getting to truly be competitive with what's happening literally in the market today?
And to VW, what are you doing in California? Because as of March 4th, 2025, you have not been granted an autonomous vehicle testing permit for testing either with a driver or without a driver. So where have these vehicles been testing if they have not been testing in Austin? All the testing been going on in Germany. We really truly need some clarity from VW. So I say to the folks at VW, Allison, Pascal, love for you to come on Autonomy Markets and really tell us truly what's going on there. We really truly need clarity there. What do you think, Walt?
I just love how you pivot this into trying recruiting new guests. But Grayson, you never seem to have difficulty. Every week you've got someone new that you're interviewing on the road to autonomy. So yes, of course, get VW out there. And I think we've got a couple good road trips to some of these OEMs that we've got queued up in the coming months. So I'm looking forward to doing that together.
I'm looking forward to doing it together with you and to seeing what's being built there. One company that we discuss a lot on Autonomy Markets that just keep chugging along is Toyota. This week, in partnership with Pony AI, James Pang's company, they announced the Toyota BZ4X Robotaxi, custom built for Pony. That's their 7th generation. Don't forget, Toyota has a strategic partnership with Uber. Could we potentially, over time, see these Pony Robotaxis go on the Uber network in Europe?
Sure, why not? But I think the more interesting thing here is, and we've talked about this before, Toyota just being a willing partner to autonomy and just that management team, having their foot forward in, trying to partner with May Mobility, Aurora. They got a partnership with Uber. You've got this one now with Pony AI. I don't know. I think that is probably the better approach. Hopefully it doesn't backfire and that they're so scattered in so many different directions that they can't focus on the right one that's going to push them forward to sell as many cars as they can. But they've definitely been friendly to tech partners.
Toyota could become the enabler that allows Uber to accelerate fragmentation, which they need. And then we have politics. Secretary Duffy is accelerating deregulation in autonomy. He came out today and said that he wants the innovation to happen here in America. He wants to remove the regulatory hurdles, and he wants to work towards an autonomous vehicle framework. We finally have a comment from the Trump White House that they're going in on autonomy. Big day today in autonomy.
I just hope that Secretary Duffy is so distracted with moving the framework forward that he ignores the fact that New York is ignoring his pleas to remove congestion pricing in New York City and leaves us alone with our traffic-free or traffic-lightened streets. But it was great to see the vehicle framework today. Do you think that implies that China is definitively out, that there's like a lockdown on these Zeekr cars that Waymo is hoping to use, or is actually already starting to use in California?
The comments today by Secretary Duffy about having it made in America is a clear example that I called it right. It was an unforced error. It's time to pivot and accelerate your relationship with Hyundai, and the vehicles are being built in Savannah, Georgia. The headline after this came out. This is a Bloomberg headline. U.S. regulator takes initial steps to boost self-driving cars. Market reaction was muted to that. Why?
What is the U.S. regulator? What steps are they taking? Because when I looked at that 2-page release, I didn't really get that much out of it, other than I think it was saying something like foreign cars or import cars had some exceptions that enabled them to do self-driving, and domestically made cars didn't have that, so they're going to try and clear that. First of all, that in itself doesn't make sense. Why would you provide exemptions for imports but not for the domestically made cars? So can you explain that to me?
I can't explain it to you because I'm not a Waymo Democrat, as Thomas L. Friedman wrote in the New York Times today. That's why. what Mr. Friedman laid out. No, Mr. Friedman actually made a really interesting case that the vehicles need to be built in America and they should be made with union labor for robotaxis. He wrote a compelling case to make it built in America. So you have this really interesting divide where the secretary definitely wants them made in America. And then you have Thomas L. Friedman from the New York Times opinion columnist and 3 times Pulitzer winner saying he wants it made there. So the question is, are robotaxis becoming a political voting bloc over time?
Well, your initial question was like that this regulator takes initial steps should excite investors. But if you're telling me that it's to force things to get made in America, I'm not sure that investors are embracing that, just like they didn't embrace, some of the early comments by some of our secretaries about making everything in the United States, because at some point it's better to make things in different or get certain parts in different parts of the world so that you can generate a profit and, more importantly, scale up as quickly as possible. The belief that you can just start to make a bunch of things, or cars or whatever it is, in the U.S. overnight, I think is foolish.
There is a lot of press conferences, improv press conferences, and we don't know where this is going. That's the thing I'll say. We don't know where this is going. Another thing where we don't know where it's going, Aurora. We're recording this podcast on Thursday, April 24th. There is 30 days in the month of April. We have not gotten a filing. We have not gotten a press release. We have not gotten a post on X if Aurora has done driver out. A lot of anxieties building with T minus 6 days. Are they going to pull it off, Walt?
I think you've kind of preempted what is normally your final question was, what do we have for next week? And I've got a lot of earnings next week, that's for sure. But I think what we have for next week is May 1st. May 1st is next week. So, tonight is, because we're recording this on Thursday, tonight is the NFL draft. So in the spirit of the NFL draft, I will say this. Chris Urmson, you're on the clock.
And what happens if the clock runs out?
I think we'll discuss that next week. I am hopeful that our good friends at Aurora will deliver as promised. And let's put a note in this. Wasn't the initial promise. This is the pushback promise.
Walt said it. We will be watching. And if they do go driver out before next week, the next 6 days, because we don't record till then, we will speak about it on the episode. Until then, the clock is ticking, the anxiety's building, and me, somebody's drinking a ton of vodka. Let's hope they pull it off. Walt, this is fun. We got a lot to look forward to. The future is bright. The future is autonomous. The future is scaling and keeping promises. Walt, until next week.